online tools, and
Mm.
teachers often had difficulty in choosing the one which is proper for them, yeah, and the one that will work well for them, yeah. All right. Um, is it enough to only know how the tools work in order to teach online, or is it there anything else that teachers should know?
Well, I think that when it comes to the tools, it's worth bearing in mind. It's like how there's on the one side, there's how does the tool work, but on the other side, it's um, what can I do with the tool? Because I might be able to do things with the tool that it wasn't really intended to do. Even if we talk about something like Google Docs, I don't really think that it was intended to be, when it was made, a massive interactive worksheet that 30 students can work on at once. But we can still use it that way. So rather than thinking about, I need to know how to use all the tools perfectly and I need to understand every little nuance about how they work, um, it's better to think, okay, how do I get the tool to do what I need it to do? And I might not need every last little function on it. On the other hand, there may be some tips and tricks and things like that that I can learn about each tool, which great, like, great, absolutely, fine. But if it's doing what I need it to do, then that's enough.
So like if students benefit from the tool that you use, it's worth using, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Is it helping my lessons and is it helping my students achieve more? Because I think something which I've noticed through well, you always see this when you work with teachers. When I observe them, when I watch teachers' lessons, um, there have always been teachers who put more thought into their own materials and what they're bringing to the classroom than what the
mhm.
students are doing in the classroom and how much the students are actually learning. And we as teachers very often like to think that those two are one and the same, but in reality, they're not. What students learning is not necessarily my teaching. They may not learn what I'm trying to teach them, but they might learn something other than that. It's very difficult to control exactly what they're learning. But if we focus on maximizing their opportunities for learning, then they'll make more progress in the long term. There have always been teachers that focused a bit more on their materials than on the
Mhm.
students, who take lots of joy in making handouts and games and things like this. But it's really because they have fun and they enjoy this. And very often the students, it's not that the teacher doesn't care about the students, the teacher absolutely does. It's just that the students, they stop being this first consideration.
Mhm.
Or their learning, let's say, stops becoming the first consideration over things like fun and enjoyment and things like that. And I think with online teaching, one of the big challenges that lots of teachers have faced has been that of engagement and that of getting the learners to actually do the things that you want them to do online, especially if you work with YL. And because of this, there have been lots of, I think, teachers who've tended to look for this. They look for kind of all of the newest, latest tools and gadgets. And they trying to think of all the fun little things to turn the lesson into a circus so the little buggers will actually pay attention. Um, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, no.
Yeah, so you don't have to impress your students, but you actually have to teach them and make them learning, right?
Yeah. And, it's what's going to interest them at the end of the day, and I find that this is true for most students, is when they have the ability to express themselves and hear other people who they care about express themselves. That's, at the end of the day, going to be one of the most motivating parts of any class. So as much as we can facilitate that online, um, we're going to be better off in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Um, what are your favorite online teaching tools, and how do you use them? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a little bit boring in most lessons, if I'm honest. I tend to, in a normal lesson, stick to a few things that I use all the time. My absolute favorite is Miro. It's in my RO. It's an interactive whiteboard software. which I use all the time when I teach online, just because it's quick, it's easy to use, it's very functional. I can draw on it. If I've got students who are good with technology, I can let them collaborate on it by adding them as members. So I can add the worksheets there for them and they can complete everything. I can see what everyone's doing. This is for kind of tech savvy students. Not all students are this good with technology. So if they're not, that's fine. I just don't add them as collaborators, and I drive the whole time, so to speak. And I give them some other way of communicating. I think the second is definitely going to be Google Docs. I mean, it's not the most interesting, but being able to make a worksheet and a handout which the learners can all access and edit and I can keep an eye on is very often a big consideration. I mean, you do occasionally run into problems with it, like people can't open it or they're using their phones or things like that you have to get around. But that's another kind of big one, which I'm quite fond of. If we talk about tools that you might use for more specific purposes, there are some which can be quite helpful. Things like Nearpod. Nearpod's a fun little software where you can use and you can make a little bit presentations, but you can use three-dimensional photographs and you can use 3D panoramas. So you can use it to make this kind of immersive experience. I recently saw a lesson where the teacher had used this to create like an interactive tour, well, a very limited interactive tour of the Taj Mahal. It was related to a reading lesson the kids were doing. So Nearpod's a fun tool for doing this. And when it comes to getting them to engage online, I'm also quite fond of the platform Quizzes. It's if you're familiar with Kahoot, Quizzes is very similar. I prefer Quizzes though, just because it gives me the option to set it easily as individual work or as like a whole class activity like Kahoot. So we can do the game show style thing, or I can switch it on and let them work at their own pace. If you work with kids, a similar tool is called Blookit. That's Blookit. It's very similar as well. It's a kind of a quiz style game, but what it does is you plan and prepare the questions for it, and then it will have a selection of games for the students to play. So you select one of the games for them to play, and there's like tower defense and like card games and spies, like computer hacking games and whatever your kids are into, fishing and whatever the kids are into. And it will use the questions which you provide to help the kids play the game. And the nice thing about it as well is that it will repeat the questions. So usually you set a timer of, for example, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever, and they compete to see who can get the most, but it will repeat the question. So if they start struggling or if they miss a question or whatever, it's not the end of the world. That question's going to come back around later. The kids really like it. The kids really get into it. They like seeing the high score. For adults, probably if you work with adults, it's probably not going to be quite so relevant. But if you're working with adults, you probably aren't having so much trouble getting them to do the work anyways. Yeah, that's a few of the ones that I've used the most recently. I think those would be the ones that I've used the most. Yeah, I see a comment coming in. It's the name Blookit. That's Blookit.
Blookit, yeah, Blookit.
Yeah.
I think after the live session, like we will collect all the names that Chris mentioned and share with you in the comments. Yeah, all right. Let me remind you that Chris is with us today because he's also the author of the course on online tools for teaching English, and I'm sharing the link with you. It's on Grade University online self-study platform. And let's find out who is this course for. Like, you are the author, so could you tell us, like, who have you written it for?
Yeah, so our goal when we were putting together the course was to put together a course to help teachers who kind of getting started with teaching online and they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Maybe they've got quite a bit of offline teaching experience, but they may not be quite so familiar with teaching online. Maybe they're struggling with ideas of what to do for online teaching. So the idea is that it's kind of a collection of some basic tools for online teaching and how to implement them in the classroom and what they can be used for.
We have some teachers who have already bought the course. We've
Mhm.
received the feedback from them, but teachers who want to buy the course, by the way, they can do the free demo. So the first unit of the course is absolutely free. So you can register on the platform, and you can you can try the demo unit to see how the platform works. And if you like the course, of course, you can proceed and buy the course. The question that we often get from teachers, and I will address it to you: what tools have you included in your course? Because like I'm really tired of answering these questions. I know that there are more than 20 tools, or probably even the number is bigger. Yeah, so could you please answer this question?
Yeah, so basically, there's tools there for a variety of purposes. There's tools there. I mean, I can't tell you exactly what tools we include because that's kind of giving the game away a little bit.
Yeah.
But there are tools there for a variety of purposes. There's things for helping us teach all 4 skills. So speaking, writing, reading, listening. There's some very nice tools there to help the students both in class and out of class. So even if you're not teaching, for example, perhaps online, you're teaching them offline, but you've got maybe some online components or you've got an element of hybrid learning built in, you could still implement these, as well as some tools for helping with things like grammar practice, finding interesting tools and finding interesting things to bring into the classroom, like areas to find resources, like where you can find videos for video lessons, where you can find different types of things for different sorts of lessons, and some tools to help you kind of build your own materials should you need that. So yeah, there's a variety of tools. We've tried to include them primarily free tools, or at least tools with a free option in them. Very few of the tools that we present are paid. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So really, we cannot list all the tools that we included because the number is quite big, but all of them are useful. And of course, if you take the course, you will know how to use them and what to use them for. All right. When it comes to online lessons, students have more distractions within their environment than inside a classroom. And online English teachers have no control over their environment. And it's challenging to maintain the attention. Could you give some tips on how to keep students interested and focused? And are there any tools for this?
Well, I mean, some things are just managed. Some of this comes down to good classroom management. Because what I would point to first is that if you've got problems with engagement online, and this is coming from someone who works extensively with secondary age students, who also has to teach them online. If you've got trouble with engagement, this almost always comes down to a classroom management issue of some sort. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that your classroom management's bad, but what this does mean is that you might not have routines in place which are motivating students to do what you want them to do. Because, of course, when students don't do what we want them to do, our first instinct as teachers is to punish. But this doesn't really work. That we want to think, oh, they're not listening to me. They're not doing what I want. They're not, I need to do something about it. I need to retaliate. In reality, the solution is very often the other end. It's motivating them and pushing them towards the behavior that you want instead of away from the behavior that you don't want. So if you're working with kids, one thing that you can try to kind of get the engagement up is introduce some elements of competition. Maybe put them all on teams and keep kind of team points with some prizes for the winning team each week. Like they can pick a song to listen to while they do some work, or they can pick which game they play for a revision at the end of the week. So kind of tying it to some real in-class rewards. Even when it comes to things like switching on a camera, the question becomes, well, how do I get them in the habit of switching on their cameras? using routines to do this. A simple routine such as show and tell at the beginning of every class. If you've got an online class, this can be lots of fun, because one of the benefits of an online class is that everyone has a kind of a different here and now. My here and now is very different from your here and now. So that means that I potentially have something very interesting to show you. Whereas if it's all kind of, if we're all in the same room together and we all open our bags, we're all going to have pencils and, you know, our cell phone and a laptop. Like, it's not going to be quite so interesting. But by extension, they also have to turn their cameras on to do this. So especially if you make it kind of a pair work or a group work activity, they're not really going to be able to get away without switching their cameras on. So this would be the first area that I would address it from in terms of engaging them online, would be really taking a critical look at my own classroom management and thinking not only of how am I managing, am I making what I want them to do clear, and am I supporting them enough? This is all, of course, very difficult, very challenging, and very important, but also asking ourselves the question of how am I motivating them to get to the behavior that I want? Because that could be the piece of the puzzle that I'm forgetting. I know from speaking for myself, that's the piece of the puzzle that I often forget, is how to motivate people. If we talk about specific tools that can be used for this, the guiding rule, if you're having trouble with engagement, is that you want to inject fun where you can. And some small elements of fun and gamification can be nice. Now, if you've got adults and the adults are studious and hardworking and they kind of do everything, you're probably doing okay. Like, you probably don't need to add gamification that much. You can stick with what you're doing, make sure that you can monitor them, keep an eye on them and help them. Tools like Google Docs or any kind of editor, Jamboards, using Google Slides, anything that you can see is going to be fine, probably good enough. If you've got a problem with engagement, especially this is thinking about the YL teachers out there, lots of us, injecting fun where you can. You know, injecting a bit of fun where you can. So taking, for example, instead of just giving them controlled practice from the book, maybe there's a way you can turn it into a quiz game, or using like the Jeopardy toolkit to make it into like a game show type activity. Or there's another activity, for example, one of the activities that I like to do with mine is there's another tool called Bamboozle. And it creates this nice kind of fun game show type of game. So one thing that we'll often do is I give them all the questions that are in the game beforehand. I give them 5 minutes to work through as many of the questions as they can. Like, if you know it, great. If you don't know it, great. 5 minutes with your group, with your team, answer as many of the questions as you can. Then we start the game. And whoever wins, wins. Takes a bit longer, takes a bit more time. But I'd rather spend 10 minutes on an activity that they're going to engage with than 3 minutes on an activity that they won't. And it just means I need to plan the rest of my time accordingly.
Okay, let's talk about teaching writing. I know many teachers avoid doing this online. What can you recommend them?
And I don't know why, because to be honest, I've taught some of the best writing lessons I've ever taught online. I think, well, if we think about teaching writing online, let's break down what the potential challenges could be. One is I don't know how to keep an eye on the learners while they're working. Two is the students are slow typers. And, oh, that one's a nasty one. Three is, well, maybe I'm not that comfortable giving writing lessons in general, and the idea of just doing it online is just like, oh no, oh no, 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 no. So let's break through it bit by bit. What do I have to do first? Well, they need a place where they can write. I'm gonna sound like I'm beating a dead horse here. Google Docs is my first go-to. I very often, but to make it a bit more communicative, because even in offline lessons, I'm not a big fan of lessons where everyone's sitting quietly and writing. It feels a bit too much like an exam to me, and I don't like my lessons to feel like a test. Sometimes it's beneficial, absolutely. But when it's possible to make it collaborative, I find that this is quite helpful. So when I give writing tasks in class, especially if I have a group of students who I know can work well together and can work productively together, put them in a breakout room together, give them both access to the same Google Doc, and let them work on the document together, whatever you're doing. I find this has a few benefits online. One, I can see what they're doing pretty easily because I can see what's in the Google document. Two, I can hear them talking to each other, which means that if they don't know a word, I'm going to hear them ask each other. Three, if someone gets stuck, they can help each other. And this may give me a little bit of extra time while I'm going around. Because, well, if they can answer, let's say, 60% of their questions to each other, well, that makes my job a lot easier while monitoring. That I can just come around and I can also help them. One other thing to think about is how you're going to help them. Because, again, one of the reasons that I'm a fan of the Google Suite for online documents is that I can also make comments and edits, and I can add in little things to help them. It gives me lots of freedom to adjust to what they need on the spot. So this is thing number one. There's other platforms, of course, that you can use to help publish writing. If you use Mira, they can do it directly in Mira. Like, I know some teachers who really like doing that. They set this routine with their classes. Padlet's another fun way to get them to all submit at once. Padlet's got a very nice feature they can publish. They all kind of write on the same wall together, which can be quite nice. You really don't need a lot of tools for this. The biggest thing that you're going to need is, let's say, a place for them to draft. That is a place for them to write privately, and a place for them to publish. That is a place for them to put their text publicly to the others. One silly, easy way to get them to publish the text to the others, if you use chat, like Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever, you have a group chat, get them to copy paste it there. Boom, publishing, done, easy. They can now read each other's. So when it comes to developing writing in the lesson, there's really not that much to it. We really just need a good kind of layout and a decently structured writing lesson and a place for them to work where we can see what they're doing. Now, some learners do have trouble with technology, or they may say things like, oh, teacher, I'm a bad typer. I prefer to handwrite. It's worth having a conversation with the students. The way to approach this conversation, though, is not to say, well, you need to type it because I say so. Because I say so has never worked on anyone. Didn't work on me when I was a teenager. It's never worked on me as an adult. Probably not going to work on your students. A better question to ask them is, okay, so what are the problems with asking you to type? Like, what's the disadvantage here? Let them say no in as many ways as they can. It's important to start with the no before the yes for two reasons. A, we're being manipulative. So we want them to remember, because we remember the last thing that we see. And if we get them to talk about the good things last, guess what they remember? We're being manipulative. Point number two is that you're giving them the chance to voice all of their concerns first and listening to them. Because if you start telling them all the good things first, they're going to say, they're thinking in their brain, but, and they're just waiting for their turn to speak. Let them say the negatives first. Then ask them, so how could this help you? They've already voiced their no. They've already voiced their rejection. They've already protected themselves. Now they're ready to talk. And they might have listed 100 reasons why, but you really just need one or two convincing reasons why they need to do it, and you'll get them on board. As long as they see how it's going to help them in a meaningful way. And just talking about the fact that, well, what if you need to send an email in English? Like, do you really want to spend 45 minutes, one finger typing at your keyboard at work? Like, what's your boss going to say? If it's teenagers, like, do you really want to spend 10 hours doing this in front of the computer at night? Although teenagers are typically pretty tech savvy and they're pretty okay typing. So these are some of the kind of immediate issues. Things that you can do to help with writing online. There's also lots of asynchronous programs. Cambridge's Write and Improve. It's very nice. I'm a big fan of it because it also will check the writings for you. Not perfectly. You still need to review it manually for feedback and to know what to prioritize to help the learners more. But it will provide some immediate feedback, and it can catch things like little corrections and help them to improve it. And it gives them some feedback while they're waiting for your feedback. And I find this makes students a lot more motivated to write. Because one of the big demotivating things about writing is when you've got an overloaded teacher, because let's be real, we are all overloaded, who take way too long to give the writings back because we're all overloaded. But then when I give something to my teacher, it's like giving it to a black hole. What's my motivation to write if I'm not going to get any comments or feedback on this? Well, getting something immediately is already a big upgrade. Even better if I get something more later, for example, audio recording your feedback or something like that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here. And the last part, that teachers often don't feel quite so comfortable teaching writing in general. Yeah, it's probably worth kind of familiarizing yourself with basic approaches to teaching writing, things like product approach to teaching writing, the process approach to teaching writing, because once you kind of familiarize yourself with that and you've got a very decent framework, or at least like what are the basic stages of a writing lesson, how to put that online becomes much less daunting. Because if I just throw up the task and I say, okay guys, write, I'm probably going to have questionable success and questionable motivation to do it. But if I've shown them a model, analyzed the model as a class together, I've given them some language they can use to help them, I've given them some time to plan and brainstorm ideas, and I've helped them kind of organize their ideas a little bit, and now I say write. Now this is going to be much more motivating, if only because I feel more confident that I know what to do.
Yeah, I think the main problem is that a lot of teachers just don't know how to teach writing. Yeah, and the writing lesson usually looks like homework, or if it's an online lesson, the teacher is just online and the students are writing for an hour and then they submit their writings and that's all.
And that's the other thing. That's a good point, and that's what I would also say is that writing for an hour in class, it's worth asking the question of how did I help the students today? Anytime we teach. And it's a very simple question, but it's a very important one. It's how did I help them today? And you need to be real honest with yourself when you answer that question. Because if I set a 1 hour writing lesson for my students, and I ask myself, I give them an hour to write and I just sit and watch while they do this.
Yeah.
I really need to ask myself, what did I do for my students today? And the answer is probably not very much. I mean, it's not a nice truth, but it is. So one thing could be possibly dialing back the expectations and setting a more reasonable expectation in terms of the amount of content you like them to write. Very often, especially if you teach like A1, A2, a 50 to 70 word piece of writing is already like, whew. And even though we look at that and think, well, 50 words, that's not much. That's not much if you're an English teacher. I've written sentences in the last week that were probably 50 words. But if you're an A2 student, that can feel like a mountain that you've got to climb. And that might be good for you. The idea is that whatever amount of writing you expect them to do, especially if you're writing in class, it needs to be something they can reasonably produce in 10 to 15 minutes. This is going to do a few things. A, it's going to give you time to focus on what you need to do before that during the lesson to scaffold it, to help them appropriately. And it's also going to give you some time to focus on feedback later on in the lesson. Let them read each other's. Going back to publishing, give them all time to copy paste everything onto Padlet. Let them read each other's. Gives you time to select some common errors, things to look for. Even just giving them, even if you can see everyone's and you see some common mistakes, just stopping everyone with 2 minutes left and say, okay, guys, 2 minutes left. Let's all check together a few common mistakes. I saw this mistake with present perfect. Some people are saying he has. Check that you didn't make this mistake. If you made this mistake, please correct it. Giving them some time and guiding them through editing. Smaller quantity, but higher quality. The takeaway.
Yeah, that's true. The same question about reading, because it's always often given. It's often given as a homework. Are there any tools for teaching reading online, and how teachers can use them?
Yeah, anything visual is going to work. But the big thing is that it's visual. If you ask me, I think we've got a massive advantage teaching reading online as opposed to teaching reading offline. And the massive advantage is this: we can control what they see online. Because if I'm offline and I give you a text, I can encourage you to look at certain things, but I can't restrict your view. I can't put horse blinders on you and make you read the text. Online, I can absolutely do that. Online, I can zoom in, look at one paragraph. We've got our nice little, most things, if you use, for example, Mira, or even if you use Zoom, they'll have this annotate function that you can annotate in the reading text. You can underline key sentences. You can ask the students to do that as you go through together, to circle keywords. So there's lots of ways you can make reading visual, and that's going to be one of the big ones. There are some other tools that you can use which are also particularly helpful. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head because it's in my notes. But we talk about it in the online course, but it's an application which scrolls the text automatically at a certain speed to help develop reading fluency. So normally, because very often one of the problems that we have as students is that very many students read very slowly and very attentively. And with this tool, you can set the text scroll to a certain speed. So you can actually, and it will slowly scroll, or if you want it to quickly scroll, and you can pick how fast you want them to go. And this also makes it a very nice tool, for example, for homework, for home study. If you've got a student who comes up to you and they say, "Teacher, I don't feel good with reading. I really have trouble reading." Well, give them that and get them to crank up the speed by 1 every day. Eventually, they're going to be really quick readers, really fluent readers. So there's lots of benefits to teaching reading online, but I'd say the big thing is making it as visual as possible. Because when we read, we very often have to construct very abstract, difficult meanings from the words that we see, and this is extremely difficult. When we make it visual, we simplify it. We have some sort of kind of anchor to hold on to. Some people like an island of reliability, something I can hold on to help me understand everything else.
Yeah, and I would like to add that there are many applications for teaching young learners with reading stories, and they can use them on their phones, and they can listen to the stories. There are subtitles and nice pictures and 3D animation, and everything looks really nice.
Oh, yeah. That's something that even if you work with lots of modern course books, they use the online workbooks. And online workbooks have come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years, because I remember 3 or 4 years ago, they were terrible. They were just they never worked. Everything was broken. Half the answer keys were wrong. Students hated them. Some of the ones that exist now are very much worth using with your students if it's a possibility. I know the ones that we use right now we're very happy with. It's very easy to use, very user-friendly. Yeah.
Right. I have a couple of questions left, but they are very short but very tricky. How many online tools can we use in a single lesson?
How hard do you want your lesson, or how hard do you want your life to be? What I would say is this. As few as you need to make the lesson meaningful and fun and engaging. Routine is more important than novelty. Because if I bring in 8,000 new tools every lesson, think about that from the learner's perspective. Every time I come in and every time it's a new thing that my teachers found and oh no, how do I use it? What's the website? Where do I go? Routine is a powerful, powerful force. So find what works for your group. And you may have different routines for different groups. That's fine. Whatever works. Set the routine for the group and stick to it. And then bring in the other tools as necessary. Like, for example, we talked earlier about Nearpod with this 3D immersive tour that you can make. Yeah, we don't use that every lesson. We bring this thing out, like in my own teaching, I wheel this thing out every probably once a month for a lesson where it's kind of relevant and helpful and useful. But you know, it's useful to know a lot of the tools because that's your toolkit, that's your toolbox. And if you need that very specialized specific thing to do this specific job, great, you've got it. But the most important thing is having one or two, having your workstation and your whiteboard. Where are the learners going to work? Where am I going to work? If you've got that, you're good to go.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the last question from me, and we will probably have some questions from the people who are watching us. So don't be shy and type your questions in the comments. We are looking forward to them. And my question is, what does a perfect online lesson look like?
A perfect online lesson looks like a lesson where I would define it the same way that I would define it a useful offline lesson. To me, a useful online lesson is a lesson where the learners have left having noticeably improved at whatever they were doing or when they came in, and they know it. I don't think that changes online. One of the big things that we need to focus on is how am I going to help them get better? How am I going to engage them and motivate them in the process of getting better at whatever we're doing? And how am I going to demonstrate to them at the end of the lesson that they have in fact gotten better and show them the steps, the further steps forward that they need to take? And that's it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a circus. It doesn't have to be fun and games all the time, although fun and games are helpful. But it's also important that we don't confuse smiling and laughter with learning, because something could be very, very fun, but not very useful in the long run. It's like sugary sweets instead of broccoli. Not everybody likes broccoli, and sugary sweets are fun. But that's how I would define a good online lesson. It's one where the students have left and they are visibly better than they were when they came in at whatever they were doing that day. They know it, and they know the steps forward to get even better.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. We have a question from Hannah. If there is an opportunity to watch this talk, yes. we are recording, and you can go back to YouTube or Facebook later if you miss it. And it will also be published on our Telegram channel. All right. Do we have more questions from teachers? I cannot see any questions. All right. So today we were talking about online tools, about quality and quantity of using online tools in an English classroom. And with us today was Reese, a Delta Module 1 and the CELTA trainer at Great Education Center. And Chris is also the author of the online self-study course, Online Tools for Teaching English, on Great University platform. Please visit our platform, try demo, and join the course. Chris is also the tutor. No, Chris is not the tutor on the course. Andrei is the tutor on the course, but the author is Chris, and the course is very engaging and interactive. So you will definitely enjoy it. Thank you very much, Chris, for answering all my questions. Thank you for joining us today. We hope we will have more live sessions with you, and our next one is in December with all the trainers and authors of Great University. Thank you very much. I was really excited to see you, and we miss you so much. And good night to you, and good evening to everyone in Ukraine. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.